Bruce, you must have something really good too.
Of course I do. It's Bruce Danielson, and I guess I'm here to entertain you too.
Good afternoon. Welcome to the informational meeting of Tuesday, October 12, 2021. Start out today, we have committee reports. Councilor Erickson, are you on the phone? I'll take that as a not yet. And we'll jump to council remarks. Councilors, any remarks? Seeing none, we're going to jump into our first and only presentation today. It's going to be on the garbage container placement survey. Mark Cotter, please come forward and wow us with the information.
That sounds like a tall order. Mark Cotter with the Office of Public Works. Thank you for having us. Last time we had this conversation, we brought you some specific industry feedback, and I believe it was Councilor Kiley, maybe others that also said, can you give us some community feedback on this topic? It's obviously generated a lot of discussion at this level and throughout the community. So today we're really here to frame up what the where we're at. So the 6 areas that we're going to cover, then I'll have Josh Peterson, he's our environmental manager, cover the majority of the presentation, and then we've got our entire team here to answer questions. So first, want to give some perspective on the garbage container placement survey. We did have over 4,000 people take that survey, so we'll give you some insight. That information is also on the city's webpage for you to see and also for the community to see. Industry input, we've got further industry input that's come forward through this process. Solid Waste Planning Board is one of the larger boards for the city. And they've actually made an action at their meeting, giving you a recommendation of a path forward. We'll highlight some of the inconsistencies in the current ordinances that regardless we need to get cleaned up. There's 3 potential paths forward that we put forward for your consideration, and then also planning for the future. I know we've talked briefly about the concept within the city of Sioux Falls capping the number of licenses, and there's some pros and cons to really talk through on that. We just wanted to broach that while we're here today with you. So without further ado, I'll have Josh Peterson come up and take you through the presentation.
Good afternoon, Josh Peterson, Environmental Services Manager and with Public Works. All right, well, we've got a lot of information here and I want to make sure to leave time for questions. So I'll step through things fairly quickly, but please, if you've got something you want me discuss a little more, don't be afraid to jump right in. So going through the survey, we had it open for about 2 weeks here in August, and we had over 4,000 people take the survey. So really great participation from the public on that, and a lot of good input from them. So probably one of the main questions we wanted to discuss is the should placement, curbside placement be allowed or prohibited within the city. And you know, we got some strong feedback, 58% from those who responded said it should be allowed. So there was a lot of support by that. We did break that down by age because we did ask some questions of the public of age and how long they lived in Sioux Falls, things like that, just to get a little flavor of who was responding and where their opinions were. You know, as you look from younger to older, you get a less support for the curbside placement, but every one of them was over 50%, except for that 80 or older was right at that kind of middle 50-50. And then if you switch to years in Sioux Falls, once again, pretty solid support for allowing curbside until you get to that 20 years or more. It's once again at 50-50. So some of the challenges of taking that survey and trying to find a consensus, there was some conflicting results in that survey. You know, as we start to look at should haulers or customers bring the container out to the curb on pickup day, you know, is split with customers bringing it out, and then returning to the structure is a little bit of a flip where they like the haulers to come back by a slight margin. So, you know, there just wasn't a really solid lean one way or the other from the public, so I think there's some mixed opinions. And then what's important to the citizens was also a question, you know, whether it was the efficiency of hauling, the valet service, or keeping the fees constant. Fees was about 43%, and in having both fees and valet was also 43%. So once again, kind of a mixed results there. So just wanted to highlight a few of the things there. Didn't go through all the comments. You can see if you've had a chance to take a look at the results on the city's website. A lot of strong opinions on both sides of the issue, I would say. So along with the public input, we also wanted to get some input from the industry as well, so you would have full knowledge of kind of where we're at today. Some of the current challenges that the industry has said, and I'll take a step back. We met one-on-one with all the haulers that were willing to participate. We had 8 or 9 that took the time to come down and sit with us, so had some real good dialogue there. Pretty much across the board, the current challenges with them really are driver shortages. Some of the smaller haulers are doing well where it's more of a family business, but by and large, everybody is struggling to fill their trucks. Some companies are up to 20% vacancies that they're struggling to fill. And those that are working, they're having to put in 10 plus hours a day, 60 hours a week to maintain services to citizens. So labor is probably the biggest challenge from the industry right now. Some of the other things we talk about is driver safety, private property damage. Those are the things that as the haulers are having to go up to the structure to grab those cans, whether it's icy snow conditions, whether you got vehicles parked on the driveway, those are the things that you know, are always a constant challenge for them to make sure that they're providing the service but not you know, doing things safely. Also, what they shared with us as far as some of the potential benefits of curbside, you know, reducing the number of drivers needed is by far the biggest benefit from their perspective. You know, that 20% or more challenge they're having of hiring drivers, they'd be able to reduce, they'd be more efficient having those cans curbside. A number of the haulers also said they were willing to and potentially would invest in automated pickup trucks. It's not feasible right now with Sioux Falls having the building side pickup, and so if those were available curbside, they would make that investment as well, or at least explore it to see how feasible it was, and then that could create some more efficiencies. And then just less time in the street, less fuel, less emissions. You know, definitely some of the comments we've seen from the public is they don't want to see so many trucks on the road, and this is a potential way to help that. Cans tipping over, blowing trash, definitely has been one of the concerns from the public on going to curbside. As we talk with the haulers, pretty much all of them have invested in the cans that are a little more stable. There are some that you can stack the empty ones in each other where they get very narrow in the bottom, and those are definitely tip prone. The ones that the majority of them haul or use today have the wider base where they can't stack them like that. They're saying that they're basically will hold up to 40-mile-an-hour winds. You know, where you have the issues is if they're over full, where you have bags or recycling sticking out over the top of the can that makes the top heavy. As long as they're fully, the trash or recycling is fully in the bin, there's not so much of a concern there. And the trash is by ordinance supposed to be bagged as well, so if a trash can tipped over, there shouldn't be anything blowing. So if residents aren't following that, that's another education piece that we'd have to work on. You know, one of the other things we talked about, safety and property damage. A comment that one of the haulers made that kind of stuck with me is, you know, the resident has full control of that driveway, what condition it's in, whether they're shoveling the snow, whether they're putting ice melt down, whether they have two or more vehicles in their driveway. The hauler has no control over those conditions. And so, you know, as we start to look at who should be hauling those cans down, that's definitely something that we should look at as far as making sure that there's a safe condition. Cans not returned timely is another concern that came out of the public input, and the industry recognizes that as well. As you start to look at the survey results, one of the first questions we asked is, were they aware of the ordinance, where they were supposed to keep their cans up by their structure on pickup day? 54% of those that responded weren't aware of it. And as you've, you know, through this process, I've been much more aware of what's happening in my neighborhood, and just as I'm walking a dog and looking around, there's a lot of residents that are bringing their cans down against city ordinance today. So regardless of how this, we update the ordinances, I think there's a very much a need for some public education to make sure everybody's aware of what the responsibilities are for the homeowner and also for the hauler. Another challenge that we identified is the definition of an inconspicuous location. As city ordinance says, that's where the cans are supposed to be placed when it's not on pickup day. There's real inconsistency on the understanding of what that means, whether it's in your garage, beside your building, or just up in front of your garage, you know, in the front of your house. There's definitely, haulers have communicated there's some challenges with beside the structure. As you start looking at the landscaping that people have, some of the sloped side yards that we have, it's really not practical for a can to be stored beside a garage. And as you look at many homes, inside the garage sometimes isn't practical as well, because people just have a lot of things that they're storing. So that's another item I think we want to make sure that we're clarifying the expectations as we update ordinances. So when we were meeting with all the haulers, we did ask, you know, if we opened up, would you continue with valet service, or would you ask your customers to do curbside service? There were some haulers that said, you know, we like providing the valet service. We're going to continue that as long as it's allowed. But there were also haulers that said, no, we would like to have the efficiencies. We would ask our customers to go curbside. All the ones we talked to that said they would go curbside, they said they would provide valet, probably at an additional cost. But for those who were physically unable to bring their cans down, you know, they would still provide that service. And so as we look at it, the industry is providing both services, would provide both services, so there would be a choice for customers on what service they wanted and what service they wanted to pay. I know one of the questions the council had was cost. If we made these changes, would it lower rates from the haulers. You know, this is a question we asked, and you know, the problem with giving a definitive answer right now is there's a lot of pressures on operating costs for these haulers. With the driver shortages, they're having to raise pay to get people to fill those trucks. COVID has definitely made a challenge as well. Parts, tires, fuel, all these things, prices are going up and down. So they were unwilling to say, yes, we're going to keep rates the same, or yes, we're going to lower rates, anything like that. But they would say, if there was some efficiencies that could be gained by curbside, it would help stabilize rates. So, so that's kind of where they're at on cost. So the formal venue for haulers to provide input to the city is a solid waste planning board, and that it was discussed at our quarterly meeting in August. During that, the board did vote to recommend allowing curbside. They did not ask for a mandate. They wanted to have the market be able to determine what level of service was going to be provided. But they do feel like allowing containers to be placed curbside on pickup day should be allowed. These are the kind of the relevant current ordinances, and I'm not going to read through them all, but what I will point out is all three of them have inconsistent language on where containers are to be placed when it's not a pickup day, where they're to be placed on pickup day, and who is physically supposed to bring them down and bring them back. So, like we discussed earlier, I think regardless of the ordinance that we want to have, we need to clean up this language and make sure it's consistent. We want to make sure the three types of trash, recycling, and yard waste all have consistent language. Make sure we're clarifying residents' responsibilities and the hauler's responsibilities. So pathways to move forward. We've kind of discussed curbside, where we wouldn't mandate, but we would allow it. 3 is the valet service, what we have now, with some clarifications in ordinances. And then the number 2 there would be a hybrid. What we do is allow curbside, where we wouldn't mandate it, but we'd require the residences to bring it down if it's curbside, and we would have the hauler return it back to the front of the structure. As we started to look at those inconsistencies in the ordinance, it did seem that there was a slight edge of opinion from citizens that they liked it when the haulers brought it back to the building more than the haulers bringing it down from the building to the curbside. So with that kind of second hybrid model, we really don't get the efficiencies and operations that you would see from a curbside allowance. The slight benefit to the haulers would be that they're bringing back an empty can to the building instead of hauling a full can down and back. So a slight benefit there, but I don't think it would create a substantial efficiencies to where it would benefit the shortage of haulers or shortage of drivers, things like that. So we had kind of 2 other topics we've been talking about as part of this process as well. And Mark kind of highlighted the discussion on license capping. This has been discussed starting back in 2019 with the Solid Waste Planning Board, which has recommended to move forward with it. What we would do is create a specific Sioux Falls hauler license, along with a general license for hauling waste to the landfill for those that are hauling outside of Sioux Falls in the 5-county area. We would look at one license per 50,000 residents. So we would have 4 licenses at minimum. And then we would also grandfather in everybody who has a current license so that we wouldn't, we'd make sure we're maintaining the businesses that are here. But as attrition happens, as people retire, as companies are bought out, you know, those licenses would go away, and ultimately we'd get down to that 4 or potentially 5 as the city grows. This still allows a customer choice where we're not mandating any one hauler in any certain area or just having one hauler in the city. And then a final topic that we brought out as part of the survey was zoning the city, where we would have all the haulers in a certain area of town picking up at the same day. As we got the feedback from the citizens, there was not really a strong public support that it was something they really wanted. And then as we discussed with the haulers, we also realized it's probably not practical with the current number of haulers we have. It's going to be difficult to draw an equitable zoning in the city to make sure everybody can, we're not completely disrupting operations for the businesses. And it is likely that some haulers would probably be put out of business if we tried to zone the city at this time. So this is one thing I think we're going to table for now, or recommend tabling for now. But we'll keep it in mind for the future as potentially the number of haulers are reduced in town. It might become more feasible at that time. So with that, we'll open up for questions. We've got our team here, and there are some haulers in the room as well if you have some questions.
Thank you. Councilors, questions? Councilor Neitzer.
I'm going to start with the big one first. Why would you want to cap the number of haulers?
A couple different reasons. One is we have had a history of some haulers that come in, get a license, really do a lowball cost that's not sustainable. They'll take a lot of business from the current haulers that are in town and then fold up within a couple, 2-3 years when they can't meet recycling requirements and their operations aren't covered. So what we're trying to do is, for one thing, is to try and prevent that. Another is we have 13 haulers hauling in Sioux Falls right now. As things evolve, it would be nice to have fewer haulers to manage as far as having trucks on the road. And so we don't want to put anybody out of business, but as that natural attrition happens, we would like to reduce the number of haulers that are operating on our streets.
Okay, I don't know that I can get on board with that. I'm familiar with at least the recent one that came in and ended up being acquired, I think, by Waste Management and caused some disruption. But the market, I guess, besides the pain of having to switch haulers, kind of took care of that. And I mean, as far as the other issue, we do have standards, and we just have to make sure we enforce them. I mean, in terms of making sure that they're keeping their vehicles and they're not leaking and that sort of thing. But I don't know if the wear and tear in our roads is enough to justify putting, 2/3 of them that are right now eventually out of business. But maybe that for another day. So curbside, can you define that? We keep talking about curbside. Does that mean in the apron, literally in the curb, on the sidewalk, behind the sidewalk? Where would curbside be?
Curbside would be in front of the sidewalk, in your driveway, or in the parking area, I would say, of a street. it wouldn't be behind the sidewalk. It would be close enough to allow, if haulers were able to invest in automated trucks, that it would be able to pick those up.
So kind of in my apron, somewhere between the sidewalk and the
Yep,
curb,
I would
essentially,
envision
more or
most
less?
people would put it in the apron of their driveway.
Okay. And I do agree, the inconspicuous location needs to be, whatever we do regardless of the whole curbside thing, we just need to revise the ordinances. There are some things, for example, if somebody has, like my neighbor has his stored on the side of his house, and I think it's perfectly fine, but I don't, it's questionable whether that's inconspicuous or not, things like that. So, and in the commercial realm, we have rules as far as screening of dumpsters, and I believe that wouldn't change. That would be in the zoning ordinance, where you have to have a screening from a public right-of-way, but that's different than a garbage can, I think.
Yep, that's a separate ordinance that's within, I believe it's within zoning.
Yeah, I think it's in
for
the zoning
commercial
ordinance.
dumpsters.
Yeah, and I think these cans are maybe a little bit different. I think we'll maybe stop there. A lot to chew on. Thanks.
Counselor Kiley.
Thank you. Well, I have a number of comments. One regarding the curbside. It's hard for me to read this off of this tiny print here.
You want to?
But I think it's about slide number 5. I believe it was 80 and older. Maybe that was the one area that was just shy of 50%, but yet it's still pretty equal to those that voted not to allow it. So that's very interesting. I personally don't know that I'm resistant to curbside pickup because I see the advantages to all in helping to maintain prices, and also in terms of efficiencies. And plus, I kind of look at this a little bit like, as a homeowner, you've got certain responsibilities. You're responsible for mowing your yard. You're responsible for clearing your sidewalks and maintaining your sidewalk even in the summer months, or having somebody do that for you if you're not able to do that. So I do believe to a degree that, that is a responsibility of a resident to ensure that we're going to have our garbage hauled away, mostly for health reasons, health of the community. But I do have some concerns regarding when it comes to the cost. I know curbside service would help stabilize rates. I know that it would, but it's initially going to reduce the cost of operation. There's no way that it can't reduce the cost of operation because you're saving a lot of time. So I think there's going to be an initial cost savings. And then over time, as it becomes more expensive to replace trucks and personnel wages increase and other factors, maybe that would help to keep that rate lower versus the current valet service that we're providing. Because I think you bring out a very good point that the driver safety is very much relies upon the property owner. I hadn't really considered about multiple cars parked in the driveway, because I don't keep mine in the driveway. I keep mine in the garage. Quite frankly, I keep my containers in the garage too and take them out on pickup day, which I failed to do last night, by the way. But anyway, so yeah, the idea of having to negotiate around vehicles that are in the driveway and potentially being liable for maybe hitting one of those, because the individual's hauling it down to the street, they slip on the snow or the ice, and the container scratches a vehicle or knocks off a mirror. I can see that. I had not really given that consideration previously. I do think that the inconspicuous location, a lot of that is on us for people not knowing where those cans should be, and as well as our haulers, who should be considered partners in this whole process. So I do think there's a lot of room for improvement in those areas, helping to define just where the containers should go. And, you know, going to the moving forward with pathways to move forward, one of your last slides, you know, number 2, at first glance, it sounds reasonable, but when you consider allow curbside, do not mandate, and require haulers to return the container to the structure after collection, the reality is you haven't cut the number of steps down for that hauler. They're still going up to the structure and back, whether or not they're leaving it curbside or returning it. I mean, or whether they're going up to collect it and then returning it, or if it's at curbside and they still have to return it. Because they return it, they still have to get back to their truck. So I can see where it's probably minimal savings on that, and so that's why I'm not necessarily opposed to curbside pickup, and I'm looking at the results of the survey, and it shows that majority of our citizens aren't opposed to that as an option either. But I am going to state a concern as it currently exists. Currently, our ordinance states that there is no curbside pickup. There's confusion within the population, within the residents. I don't believe there should be confusion with our haulers. Yet I can guarantee you, I could go home and I can find orange and green containers left by the hauler curbside, a violation of our current ordinance. And I don't think that there's any good reason to explain that. And quite frankly, I'm not going to name names, but I'll say it's some of our largest haulers in the city, which my hauler, which operates on a much smaller scale, that puts them at a distinct disadvantage if they're following the rules and the others are not. So I think we as a council need to ensure that our ordinance, current ordinance, is enforced until this is changed. And I'm not opposed to the change. I hope I've made that abundantly clear. But I'm a rule follower. We put ordinances in place for a reason. And if we feel as a council they should be changed, then we should change it. But until that time, they should be adhered to. So I would encourage all haulers to adhere to the current ordinance until this is changed. Otherwise, this council could request enforcement of that ordinance and any consequences that might go along with that. So, thank you. Great presentation.
Thank you.
Yeah, it's good information. Thank you.
Other questions, councilors? Councilor Brecky?
Go ahead, let Marcia go.
I do.
Is that you, Councilor Erickson?
Yeah, so quick question. Thanks for the presentation. I think part of the confusion too is while we said that there was going to be cost savings and we were doing it for COVID and workforce, then we had a large hauler tack on another $10 if you weren't bringing it curbside. And so all of that was, I think, a little bit unfortunate and I think problematic too. So my question, Josh, is what other licenses other than alcohol and cannabis do we cap in the city currently?
That I'm not aware of. We'll have to do some research on that and follow up for the council.
Yeah, I would be curious on that. And then I remember not long ago when we had the Boulevard debate. Again, I would like to find a happy medium. I'm just pointing out some inconsistencies in my opinion. So when we had the Boulevard ordinance, we outlawed or mandated out, you couldn't allow anything going forward to have brick mailboxes because it was in the driver's view, in the way. And then now we're saying, well, wait, we want them past the sidewalk, which doesn't make sense. In my opinion, if mailboxes aren't good, then we probably shouldn't want the garbage cans there if it's a safety reason. It either is a safety issue or it is not a safety issue. And so that's where I would like some additional eyeballs on this for the sake of just where exactly we're talking about. And then the last item I bring up are multifamily and rentals. I think that I own one and I'm know that this would cause great issues for a lot of folks within the multifamily, because who's doing it, who's bringing it out. I mean, you've got a 10-plex, you got a 5-plex, and missing garbage only makes it worse for everyone else, whether somebody's traveling or not. So I get we need to find a happy medium, but I just want to point out a few problematic things as well as some inconsistencies with the way that we do other things as far as capping licenses and obstructions in the right-of-way. So thank you.
Thank you, Councilor Erickson. Councilor Brecky?
Just a few comments and a little bit of history. I'm responsible for that word inconspicuous, which is apparently evolved into, something different. And I'll just give you a little history on that. The reason we chose that word was because there was such a variety. What we wanted, it was more or less out of sight, out of sight and kind of out of the way from an aesthetic. We were really looking at the aesthetics of it. And it worked very well for years, but we did see it as what we were doing is really just providing a relationship between the hauler and the property owner. What we were saying is the hauler, we're going to put this word in there. Yes, it's nebulous, but so every piece of property is different. People's ability to put something inconspicuous is different depending on the landscape of their property. But we figured the garbage hauler and their clients would figure it out. And I think for years it really did work that way. And I think it's still working that way. Because again, yes, it can be a million different things. But I think as a general rule, between the garbage hauler and the client, they figured out where they can comfortably put their garbage containers. And for the most part, when you drive up and down our streets, you don't see them. Some people have, paid to have, them actually out of sight, and there's a gazillion different ways to do it. But I wouldn't just rush right away to change the word inconspicuous. I still think, again, it worked for a lot of years. It's become an issue. I understand why when you initially look at it, you say, well, what does that mean? But for many years, it's worked well. And again, I think the bottom line is when you drive up and down a street, do you see them? And for the most part, you don't. And that's because it's working, because it is based on a relationship between the hauler and the client. So I would just, speak to that little piece. And then the other thing is just dating back to when the first garbage haulers licenses were issued, when we established the first set of regulations. I think we had something like 38 or 33 garbage haulers. And the problem at that time is we had people that were not serious about the business, and they were getting in and out of it so rapidly. Anybody that had a pickup, they weren't tarping, any of those things. And what we were trying to do was achieve a balance between the open free market and capitalize on the fact that that's a job that a lot of people can do, and back then could do it even more well because there wasn't all of the environmental regulations that went with it. But capitalize on the free market and let the free market serve our community, but make sure they were serious about it. So we tried to put in, regulations, but minimal regulations. We really just wanted, to, again, have it tarped, not having it blowing all the way out. Over the years, there's been regulations added, obviously necessary as a result of the environmental concerns. But I think over the long haul, not to use a pun, over the long haul, it's been good for the community because it did still allow a lot of garbage haulers to exist, which created a good competition. It allowed smaller operators to function, and people can get in and out of the business. And if they don't do well, they get out. Because maybe they've undercut, and then it doesn't work out well economically. But if they do well, they're still a small operator. Maybe they'll be bought out by one of the bigger ones. I just am not seeing the downside to the free market, and I'm concerned about this change in movement that we're thinking it's going to be best for us to evolve down to 4 or 5. What I would say in that regard is be careful what you ask for, because there's a whole lot of cities that would love to have 13 haulers and have their citizens have 13 choices, of good haulers to come pick it up, and it drives the prices lower. It gives people choices. When you get down to that 4 or 5, you're getting very close to the single contract, to the municipal hauler, and there are cities all over this country that really would say that's not near the kind of service that our citizens have been used to and benefited from in the city of Sioux Falls. So I would be very, reluctant to see us go down that path because I think what has worked for us has worked well. The fact that it's down to 13, again, when it started up in the 30s. Clearly, there's good, healthy organizations out there fully capable of performing this business, and I don't want to put any undue barriers on any new ones who might get into the business and might choose to get into the business and be successful in it. And the other thing is, I think what you're proposing, it really does favor the large haulers. You're pushing this in a direction where you're trying to show favoritism to the large haulers. And by having less haulers, it will become more expensive over time. And to all the talk about, you know, how this is going to save or not save the individual customers, if you move this to the large hauler situation, it will be more expensive for the clients. And the bottom line, it's not going to trickle down to them. It's just going to be more profitable at the top end for those larger haulers. So I think we've had something special here for a long time, and why I'm not opposed to some changes. You know, because we are unique and we've benefited so well from our uniqueness, I really would hate to see us, you know, get into a complete overhaul situation and again, just be like any other city. This inconspicuous thing has kept them back. The fact that there's numerous haulers mean there's not this ugly row of garbage, you know, there all the time. They bring it out and take it out. We have this aesthetically pleasing, beautiful city that never looks ugly and dirty and lined up with garbage cans that fall over and blow around. So I'm concerned about the direction you're going. I'm grateful for the information you've got and that you're bringing to us public in plenty of time for us to discuss it. But I just wanted to share with you, you know, some of the history and some of my concerns going forward. But I mean, it's appropriate to discuss it, but you know, just know that there's some reasons that we did things the way we did. And there were 2 different times when the bigger haulers came in and really put pressure on the city to move to a 2-hauler system, and the city refused under great pressure. I just see this as a 3rd time, and whatever evolves from it, I think it'll be good. But I appreciate the survey, appreciate what you guys have done, but I'm concerned about throwing the baby out with the bathwater. So,
Thank you. Councilor Starr.
Yes. Thank you, Mr. Chair. I had a couple of questions. I went back to the Solid Waste Advisory Board's minutes, and I started reading between the lines, and I'm wondering what was going on. So the first thing that I want to say is that I know there was a motion made that someone from the board address the council today, and it was voted down. I hope those folks that wanted to be heard feel comfortable enough to do public input today. I hope that they step forward and we get to hear from some of those folks that wanted to be heard. Always concerns me when someone wants to address this group and they kind of get voted down. So I maybe try not to read too much in between the lines. The other thing that stood out to me is there were key points from the board discussion, and they're kind of different than what was presented today. One that stands out to me that I really want to ask about is that here, curbside does not necessarily equal more litter, as demonstrated in a majority of other communities that have curbside. It seems natural that there would be more. And so where did that fact or nugget come from other communities being able to be successful with curbside service?
I might bring up one of our team that was there. I missed that board meeting, unfortunately.
Sure.
But I know many of the haulers that serve Sioux Falls also serve the surrounding communities, and most communities have a curbside pickup. So the haulers were sharing their experience compared to what they see here and what they see in their other communities. So, anything else?
Thank you for the question. I'm Holly Meyer, and I'm the Sustainability Coordinator, and I'm the Chair of the Solid Waste Planning Board currently. And so that point was made from the haulers in the audience, and they answered the question, or they answered a concern that we've heard often about when we have curbside, does that lead to additional litter blowing around because, you know, is there a higher probability where the cans would be blown over and we would have more recycling or more trash that's outside of garbage cans blown around. And so they spoke to that piece, and that point was to capture that. And primarily that point is to note I believe they were talking about other communities across the nation who have curbside and noting that they continue to have curbside because litter is not a problem. I think it was a comparison to other communities.
Super. Well, then, let me go back to my first question then, because as chair of the board, what was the concern about having someone from the board address us today and leaving it to staff?
I think our intent behind that, or what the conversation was we wanted the members to come and provide input individually, and that the city would do the informational presentation itself.
Okay. My other comment, so you get stuck at the microphone, you're off the hook, but,
Okay.
or at least with my question. The other comment was just the limiting the number of licenses, and I know that that's not where we're going to move forward, but we start creating a monopoly. And guess what happens when we create the monopoly? Then this group is going to set rates. And I don't think we ever want to get to that point, because if we're going to limit the number of licenses, then we're going to have to be the ones to set the rate then, because that's how you do regulation. You got to pick one or the other. And the free market's handling it. And I want to echo what Councilor Kiley said. We created some of the problem at the beginning with the pandemic and trying to help out, but our partners, the haulers, have done a poor job of communicating with their customers. We've created a lot of confusion in the community of what the ordinance does say. And again, I expect to see the cans go back to the house if a customer chooses to help out. I did it today. I took my can to the curb because my hauler had a bad day yesterday for whatever reason and had to come back on Tuesday rather than my normal Monday day. And I appreciate the driver. And I think most people in Sioux Falls want to be helpful up until the point that we're out of town for a day and we miss we're paying extra, or we're paying, I don't know where the valet fees came from, other than some good marketing person who needed to collect more money came from. And we've changed the ordinance by practice rather than going through the council and doing it. So it's disturbing to see haulers who put stickers on cans that say, if you don't bring your can to the curb, we're going to discontinue your service. And that's happening in the marketplace. And residents are changing companies only to have that company get bought out by bigger companies. And so we see that happening. But we totally expect that the haulers continue to follow the ordinance until we do make the change. And I know of specific formal complaints that have been made both to the city attorney's office and to Public Works that the haulers need to follow the ordinance until we do make those changes, and if we make those changes. So if nothing else today, I want that message to be heard loud and clear. If customers and residents choose to help out the hauler by bringing their can to the curb, which most of us like to do because we're helpful people, it's why we have a great community, that can better go back to the house or the inconspicuous place, or there will be additional complaints filed. I've had constituents that have done that feel very strongly. I hope we'll hear some of that in public input from residents today, because this just continues to feel really balanced inequitably to the hauler side of this rather than the resident side of the equation. So, thanks.
Thank you. Councilor Selberg.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. A couple of my questions got hit here. I would agree, like, in regards to the confusion issue, I think Councilor Kiley had hit on it too. Whatever the ordinance, it's crucial that it needs to be uniform and enforced. One question I had, and maybe I go back from the industry input, but what I'm reading from there is I'm getting kind of the feedback that the valet would be always an option, but always at a cost. But then I heard some comment to the effect that, well, maybe not always at a cost when it's absolutely necessary. Did I hear that somewhere correctly? And if that I did hear it correctly, how do you decide when it's necessary, and what do you go through for that? I'm assuming that must have something to do with a handicap or an age or a what?
Yeah, as we talked through, if we allow the option to go either or, there were some haulers that would ask their customers to do curbside, but they also, all of those that indicated that said they would provide valet at a additional cost. However, there were some haulers that like to provide the valet service that would continue to do that at their current rates and would not charge anymore. So it really is a business by business decision on what they would charge and what kind of service they would provide.
What was the percentage on that? Was it like 50/50? Some would provide it at no additional and some that maybe it was on here. Sorry, that's kind of why I was looking.
It was, I don't have exact numbers, but yeah, 50/50-ish. It was, I would say the smaller haulers were more likely to want to continue with the valet, where the larger haulers could have the benefit of curbside and really get more
The concern
efficiencies.
was, concern was the valet, but maybe they can't afford it and there's issues they have to have it. So it's kind of trying to cut through where that was, so. Thank you.
Counselor Jensen.
Thank you. Say I have a question on your pathways to move forward. Number 2, it's kind of the hybrid approach. I think that kind of is, this may be just a comment, maybe not too much of a question, but when you guys go back to the drawing board and we have this debate long term, I think that is kind of vague and confusing in some regards. So I think you do it one way or another. I think in my neighborhood, there's probably 90% of the people that take it out to the curb, and then when they get home from work, they bring it back down to the quote-unquote inconspicuous place. And that brings me to that word inconspicuous, and no offense to the origin of it, but the word and it is vague. And I think when we create ordinances, we want to be kind of clear in what we're saying and what it actually means to our citizenry, so that they can follow the rules. Like Councilor Kiley was saying and Councilor Starr was saying, we have a rule in place today, an ordinance, that says, you'll come to the garage, pick it up, and then take it back down to the garage, and many haulers today aren't following the rules. It's quite, the rules are pretty crystal clear today. So that should be followed, and I agree, but this vagueness in the word inconspicuous really doesn't allow for us to be able to enforce that very effectively, from my opinion. So I can't agree with you guys more that we need to change that and really clear that up. Now, one of the things that where this would always come up is the 80-year-olds and older, and definitely during the winter, is it's harder for them to get that out to the curb, which I agree with completely. Now, I asked my hauler, who is a local business owner here in the communities that serve us, and he works with those people. It creates a competitive advantage for him to always have his customers back and them theirs. Like Councilor Brecky said, it allows for that relationship to happen. So I think that curbside is absolutely an option, and it will allow some of our smaller companies to be more competitive against the, maybe some of the people that only do curbside. So I think that this doesn't favor our larger haulers. I think it actually will allow smaller boutique garbage haulers to survive a lot longer and have a better relationship with their customers, because we know those from other states don't really have a great relationship with their customers here in Sioux Falls anymore. So with that, I'll leave it up and wait for you guys to bring this forward. So thank you for your work on this, and thank you for getting feedback from our citizenry where it really counts. Those are the people that put us in these chairs and allow us to impact their lives. So thank you.
Thank you, Councilor Jensen, and thank you for working the words boutique and garbage into the same sentence. Greatly appreciate that. Councilor Kiley.
Thank you. I just have a few follow-up comments of my own after listening to my colleagues. There's no doubt that there is a safety factor involved in having curbside pickup, because it does create an obstruction or a visual impairment for drivers as they're backing out of their driveways and into traffic. It is different, however, from having a brick mailbox which is permanently placed in the right-of-way 24 hours, 7 days a week. Part of prohibiting that too is because of our winter street maintenance. Sometimes the plows remove the snow and also remove the mailboxes simultaneously. But there's no doubt that it could be a safety impairment if it's not brought back by the whoever, either by the hauler or by the resident, and brought back up to that inconspicuous place that we have to, I think, better identify. Personally, like I stated earlier, I keep mine in the garage. It'd be easy to say, well, let's just pass that ordinance. Well, not everybody has garages. And so, I mean, there's always going to be exceptions to the rules, so I think we need to more thoroughly look into that. I will say that I've never had a garbage can blow over, whether it was down curbside or up by my house. Sometimes placed by my house is actually worse than curbside because I get a tunnel, there's a wind tunnel effect coming through my house that you don't get if you move it just a little further down. So it all depends upon the circumstances as to whether it's more likely to blow over or not. But I've never had one blow over regardless of its placement if the lid was closed. And the times that I have generated enough garbage where I can't get the lid closed, common sense has told me to use a bungee cord to keep it down so that I don't have garbage scattered across the neighborhood. Because the only time I've seen garbage scattered across my neighborhood is when people have piled it up over the top of their can with the lid open, or actually to the side. It's not from the container itself blowing over. That's just been my experience. The issue, to me, the issue is maybe not so much the curbside as to the placement of the container the other 6 days of the week when it's not pickup day. The individuals that just leave it right out in front of the garage 24/7, that's a bigger concern to me. And quite frankly, they're not doing their neighbors any service. Nobody likes to look out their front window and look at their garbage, their neighbor's garbage container. It's not the best aesthetic. It's certainly not the best part of their home anyway. So again, I think that's probably a bigger concern to me than the curbside pickup aspect. I do, I've always, for most part, unless, as it was stated, my hauler was bought out by a larger hauler, I have usually gone back to the smaller haulers because I, quite frankly, have found better service from them, better response. I one time had a hauler that not only picked up my garbage that particular morning, but he returned with my toddler, who he said was stuck in a snowbank. Now, I'm thankful that he returned him because he turned out to be a good kid in the long run. But, so this is something that we tend to get attached to, our haulers for our garbage. If you have a bad one, oh, it's terrible. When you get that good one, you want to do everything you can to retain them. So I do kind of like to have that options, and you hate to see people get squeezed out. I don't think there's any proposal that's suggesting people get squeezed out right now, but it is kind of nice to have that option. So that's it.
Thank you. Councilor Neitzer.
Okay, so my final thoughts, and especially to make sure we give you some direction. As far as your options, I would not go with number 2. I just think that's kind of a halfway. I would disqualify that. Between the two, I think I would lean towards just letting the market take care of it. If you were to do number 1, allow curbside, you don't mandate, because then haulers like mine, which is a local city, in-town company, has said that they, at least for now, they've always done valet, and they don't charge extra, and they'll continue to do so. Somebody that doesn't want to do that could potentially say, hey, we'll charge a lower rate potentially, and the market, I think, will take care of it. Or they might charge a valet fee or whatever it may be, but people can decide. And people are very wedded to their haulers. And I think Councilor Brecky said it really well when she kind of laid out the reasons for having the competition. But I think that's where minimum standards come in, so you don't have, quote unquote, fly-by-nights. But I think the market will take care of that. So I would not look favorably on the capping issue. And to Councilor Kiley's point, I think the quality of the containment versus where the container's at is, every time I've seen stuff blow everywhere, it's usually because people just have it in a bucket or the lid's open or whatever else, regardless of where it's at. So I don't know that curbside would give me a concern about more litter. But as Councilor Kiley said, and that's why I did write down, you know, if we do allow the curbside, I think there just needs to be definition of how long. You know, so once they pick up the garbage, when does it have to move back to somewhere, whatever the somewhere is? So it's not, because I have even seen that when we changed with the COVID, that sometimes you'd see it sitting there for all week and they're not bringing it back. So there has to be a definition of that. I think Councilor Brecky makes a good point about the inconspicuous terminology. You got to be very careful about overly prescribing. I mean, maybe the language gets massaged a little bit, but everybody has a different situation. Some people might not be able to put it in the side of a garage. Some people may not even have a garage. Some people, there's a bazillion different situations. So I think guidance would be good, but there's probably not going to be something that is going to fit absolutely everybody. Probably have to talk about if they're going to do a curbside about, you know, maybe you can't put it on the sidewalk. That's probably, I would assume, for ADA and other things, you can't do that. So I think most of this is where the market will take care of it. So I think if you were to look at doing something where you were to say, the haulers could choose either option and then let people decide based on what the service that they're looking for and the pricing. And then they have the option to do whatever they're going to do. And as far as whether or not they'll drop prices or not, you know, obviously they'll figure out their finances. But again, with that many haulers, once again, I think the market will take care of it. If somebody finds some cost savings and drops the price a little bit, everybody else is going to have to think about it. So, and if they don't, they don't. So, thanks.
Thank you. Other questions, comments? I just have a couple quick ones. Tell me about enforcement today. Is it the homeowner that's in violation of the city ordinance, or is it the hauler?
If a can is not returned after, if the can is left on the driveway, it is the property owner that is in non-compliance, the way it is currently written.
So if there's a complaint at 224 West 9th that the garbage is on the curb, how is that enforced today?
We would go and inspect it and to verify that there was an issue there, and then we would take the code enforcement path and we would reach out to that citizen. Generally, I think from past history, we have a conversation or a phone call typically resolves the issue, but we haven't gone to. Donnie, you want to chime in on whether we've had to go for?
Yep, I'll take this one. Donnie Cooper, Sioux Falls Landfill Superintendent. So we do a lot of enforcement, and enforcement has ramped up since this has been a very hot topic within the hauling industry and the residents of Sioux Falls, and we get a lot more calls now because people are getting educated. And more people are calling in on these complaints. So we actually have used technology now. We do all of it on iPads. So we send them one letter the first time we get the complaint from another resident, and then once we get that letter sent out, we do a re-inspection just to make sure it's not on the day of service. So we do 2 inspections at each call, and if the resident hasn't fixed that situation, then we work with code enforcement on a citation. So again, we spend a lot of time on enforcement, and we've been getting a lot more.
My request would be if you could forward the council like some statistics on how many complaints you get per month, per year, how many code enforcements, how many actually get to the point where you have to issue a violation. I would appreciate that. It might help us in our deliberations.
Absolutely, that's all documented. So, yep, absolutely.
Thank you. And I just want to make one more comment. It disturbs me when it's polled that there's 58% of our citizens that are not aware that the ordinance sits. If we are doing such a poor job as letting our citizens know what the rules are, maybe we have to take a look at that before we move and change any of the ordinances. We don't even know if it works today because we're not following the ordinances. So that's my statement. Any other questions, comments by the council? Thank you, great presentation.
Can
Go
I
ahead.
just wrap up a little bit based on your comments? And thank you for providing your feedback. That's going to really help us to go back to the ordinances and start looking at changes to recommend, to bring to the council. Couple things I just wanted to follow up on. One is we recognize that regardless of how we go with this, public education is going to be a huge part of it. This is definitely a topic we realize people don't always understand the rules as they currently are, and as we make changes, it would provide more confusion unless we provide some education. So that's going to be a huge part of what we do moving forward. The other thing as far as enforcing the current ordinance until we make changes, we have been working with haulers to resolve the issues that have been identified. We're going to continue to do that until the changes are accepted by the city council. So I do want you to be aware that we are trying to address those as they come up. So thank you.
Very nice presentation. With your permission, I'd like to swing back to committee reports. Councilor Erickson, are you still on the line?
Yes, I am.
Go right ahead.
I can give a really brief, thank you. I'll give a really brief report. We had Municipal League last week where several city employees as well as a few city councilors were able to attend the conference. As part of the board meeting, we approved our lobbyists for South Dakota Municipal League. We had a report that the building will be paid off when the CD is due end of October, so the Municipal League's building will be paid off, which is great news to be able to do that. We talked about a few items coming forward for the legislative session, but all in all, it was a pretty quick board meeting. The Municipal League conference itself was great. There was a lot of great presentations. We had a couple affordable housing presentations with legislators there and giving feedback on many different options on the table in hopes to impact housing throughout South Dakota, whether you are the largest city or the smallest city. So all in all, it was good.
Thank you. I appreciate that. It is now time for public comment. Those in the public that wish to address anything that we've talked about here, which is mainly garbage today, this is your opportunity to come up and speak. Seeing none, I think we're going to Councilor Jensen.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'd like to move into executive session, consulting with legal counsel or reviewing communications from legal counsel about proposed or pending litigation or contractual matters pursuant to South Dakota Codified Law 1-25-2.
I'll second that motion.
Motion by Jensen, second by Council Kiley. Could I have a roll call, please?
Councilmember Brecky,
Yes.
Erickson,
Yes.
Jensen,
Yes.
Kiley,
Yes.
Neitzert,
Yes.
Selberg,
Yes.
Sale,
Yes.
Starr.
Yes.
Thank you. That motion is passed unanimously. This time we're going to move into executive session. Thank you for your attendance.